So thanks for joining us for the second session of today's water-focused activities. This is day 2 of the Water, Soil, Climate Workshop. Happy to see some familiar names and faces. So this event brings us together from many places. I am joining you from Coston, which is in the traditional and unceded territory of the Okanagan peoples. And I was born and raised on a dairy farm near Chilliwack, which is in the traditional and unceded territories of the Stolo peoples. We encourage you all to think about your relationship to the lands where you are based. I'm happy to be here moderating today's panel discussion, local responses to drought in 4 regions of BC. So agriculture and irrigation have long been part of my career, starting with moving pipe on the farm, through my 2 degrees in agricultural economics, my doctoral thesis looking at sustainability of an irrigation system in India, and as part of many projects I've been working on as a faculty member at the Okanagan campus of UBC. So my partner and I recently bought our eventual retirement home here in Coston, a lovely little pear orchard. Maybe we'll even be brave enough someday to leave the academic world and do some real work as farmers. We have a licensed well, and last year received a notice that we had to reduce water use by 50% about 2 weeks before the pears were scheduled to be harvested. So this is coming home. Now, I did a little bit of work before this to just get a broad province level kind of context of what's going on right now. And so the River Forecast Center collects data from a set of automated snow pillow stations around the province. And the photo is one of them. It's basically a platform, the snow piles up, that weights down on some sensors, and then they know how much snow water equivalent there is. And you can find this data yourself if you just search BC Forecast Snow Pillow on Google. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what you can find. This is a hydrograph or a recording of the snow pillow, and you can see that blue line is where we're at right now. And this is the Mission Creek Snow Pillow Station. So we're underneath the 25% percentile. So we're less than 25% of the average over time what we've been getting. Now that's for Mission Creek, which is fairly high elevation. Next slide, please. So this is Brenda Mine. So if you've driven the Coquihalla, that one is a little bit lower elevation as you're going up the hill towards the summit from the Okanagan side. And you can see that that blue line is way below. So the snow pillow at a lower elevation is showing less water present in the snow. Next slide, please. So I collected a bunch of data that was available through the River Forecast Center to just look at what's going on. So around the province, almost everything is below normal. 100% of normal would be normal. And those stations below 1,500 meters are even further below normal. Those little arrows on there, if they're pointing down, that means that in the same region, the average snow at lower elevation snow pillows is less or further below average than it is at the higher elevation. So we're losing this year, or we're not accumulating that mid-elevation snowpack, which is the early runoff, which is what fills our reservoirs early on. So that's where we're at right now. So that's a little bit of background I did, and hopefully as a bit of a preface to what the panelists will be talking about. So moving on now to the panelists. So I'm pleased to introduce to you our panelists who will be tackling this issue across the province and working in their capacities as consultants, advocates, and civil servants to support producers. So joining us today, we have Harvy Singh Takhar from the city of Delta, speaking to their community application to the Agriculture Water Infrastructure Program with the Investment Agriculture Foundation. We have Lynn Lashuk from the Lake Country Farmers Institute, speaking to producer advocacy and introducing new water technologies in a purvey system. We have Ione Smith from Upland's Agricultural Consulting, speaking to drought challenges on the South Coast and the PES model for working with producers on watershed restoration. And Andrew Bennett from the Living Labs Agroecology, speaking to the role of consultants in farm water planning and irrigation systems through programs like the Environmental Farm Plan and the Kootenay-Boundary Farm Advisors. After the panelist presentations, we have an opportunity for audience questions. So during the presentations, feel free to type any questions you may have in the Q&A. You can also upvote questions that other people have entered there. They will then move up the queue and we'll see them and be more likely to get those ones to our panelists when we have some Q&A time. So our first panelist will be Harvy Singh Takhar. So Harvy is a utilities engineer with the City of Delta. His work involves designs and planning for water, sanitary, drainage, and flood protection projects. He is here to discuss agricultural water projects associated with the City of Delta's application to the Agriculture Water Infrastructure Program. He has a BSc in Mechanical Engineering from UBC, a Master's of Applied Science from BCIT, and is currently completing his MBA. Over to you, Harvy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity and looking forward to just create a little bit of a discussion here. Can everyone hear me okay? Just thought I'd just check. So that's a yes. Okay, I'm going to assume. Oh, there we go. Got some thumbs up. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, John. I've actually grown up in Delta, so it's a pleasure to complete my schooling and come back and serve the community I grew up in. I do have a passion for agriculture, comes from the ancestry line, and coming to Delta, we're in a very unique situation given where we're located. Thank you for that slide change. So Delta being on the coast here, we rely on the Fraser River actually for our irrigation water supply. Now, the challenge with that is on the coast, we have a lot of salt water surrounding us, and then we have that salt wedge consideration. Now, with climate change, we're actually seeing the Fraser River freshet, which is a primary source of fresh water. And as John has already alluded to, looks like the snowpack is not that large this year. So we're probably anticipating a challenging year once again. And so once the Fraser River peak flows from that snow melt, what we're noticing, at least since I've been here, is that the peak occurs earlier in the summer. And secondly, it's very peaky, like it'll all kind of come in one go and then trickle down. And for our agricultural community, a lot of the irrigation requirements actually occur later in summer. And with this happening earlier and quicker, we have limited irrigation water to intake. The tidal influence actually pushes further upriver the lower the flow is coming down the Fraser River. Even though it has momentum, that salt wedge tries to lift it up. And then what happens is Delta has to start limiting its intake capability from the river all the way upriver towards, if anybody's familiar with this area, like closer towards halfway to the Alex Fraser Bridge area. And at this point, Delta is constrained to trying to ensure the salinity is low enough and acceptable for our farming community and convey that all the way through Delta through a large network of ditching and infrastructure. So to respond to this, actually, we had the opportunity to get funding from the Infrastructure Agriculture Foundation, which is funded by the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And we have actually proposed a few projects to build a resilient infrastructure to combat these climate change considerations. So with this, we're able to build control gates to have a higher level of water that and intended to distribute as needed. We've also in the past have had pump stations dedicated for what we call irrigation response. And on top of that, we're proposing or we're constructing this year, beginning this year, a new irrigation pump station that will lift the water and push it further west on the inland side towards West Ladner. And just touching on further on that, there are known choke points on our irrigation system, and our goal is to create the resilience to hold more water, even though, sometimes we can go through it quick in periods of drought. But if we have more water available, that way our farming community can use that. And the challenge is becoming that we have to move this stuff further and further upriver. And we are also looking to conduct studies to find an optimum location for this with the minimum salinity consideration, or, for better, more fresh water quality, and an alternative route for distributing this. I know we've had some studies done on this as well, but it always starts from kind of a larger bird's eye view, and now we're funneling into our key hotspots, which I'm hoping to carry out for my career at the City of Delta. So thank you. And any questions and comments, I'm more than happy to address, as John stated, a little later.
Well, Harvey, you did brilliantly in terms of the 5 minutes that you were allocated. So I will move on now to Lynn Lashuk. So Lynn is the secretary of the Lake Country Farmers Institute and a grateful farmer on the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. She was registered with the BC Institute of Agrologists for over 30 years and worked for agricultural organizations, governments, and allied industries in BC and across Canada, and has been involved on water initiatives such as the Lake Country Watershed Roundtable and introduction of new technologies with producers. Lynn now assists farmers and agricultural colleagues with their day-to-day operations, providing support where needed. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, John, and greetings from the Lake Country Farmers Institute. We are grateful to live and work on the unceded territory of the Syilx people of the Okanagan Nation. The Syilx Water Declaration reminds us that when we take care of the land and water takes care of us. The Lake Country Farmers Institute was formed to give farmers a voice in a community that is quickly changing from a rural agricultural community to a residential community. The Lake Country Farmers Institute aim is to keep farms in the community. The availability and affordability of agricultural water will determine the future of our farms. So I've broken this 5 minutes into the 3 challenges that we're finding. Challenge 1 is the community, challenge 2 is the availability, and challenge 3 is the affordability. So big challenge number 1 is that we have more people, more priorities, less farmers, and less water. The decisions about water are made by our council with input from staff and the volunteer Water Services Advisory Committee and the public. Decisions that impact agriculture may be made without consultation with people from the agricultural community. The Lake Country Farmers Institute members are stepping up to volunteer on the advisory committees. Lake Country Farmers Institute members, through day-to-day activities, interact with non-farming people and build capacity as valued members of the community. Challenge number 2 is the availability, the water supply and the priorities. We're having water available when we need it. That's what our challenge is. The Lake Country Farmers Institute focuses on agricultural water quantity, which is the volume and the pressure and the quality. We understand that water is limited and shared for environmental flow needs, domestic, residential, commercial, and lastly, agricultural users. We know that water licenses are not a guarantee farms will receive water, and we understand that water is not owned, though the infrastructure may be, and that the availability of water for agriculture in the future is an ongoing big conversation that reaches beyond our community and local government. We know that agricultural water must meet food safety standards and irrigation system requirements. We've taken a shotgun approach to learning and sharing about water. We are connecting with people and their organizations, hosting and attending meetings, workshops, and webinars. We understand that water shutoffs and shortages happen. An example is the multi-day water shutoff we had during the 2023 growing season. An event in the upper watershed resulted in silt and turbidity in the reservoir, affecting water quality and quantity. We also had wildfire in the community in 2023, and that resulted in the reservoir emptying multiple times to provide water for firefighting. We learn from others and share our experiences. We recommend increasing water supply with storage increasing efficiency with technology, increasing communication and inclusion of diverse perspectives when decision-making takes place. We advocate for change. And the third challenge is the affordability question and who pays. We're reminded by our community that we are the largest water users and that the cost of water is a tax burden to the non-farming users. We are reminded that human health and safety is a priority and that there is an additional cost for drinking water quality. We are aware that treated wastewater is proposed as a future source for agricultural water. So it's easy to itemize and value the 6 storage dams, 10 reservoirs, 200 kilometers of water distribution mains, 516 hydrants, 9 water pump houses, and 6 chlorine injection systems. But we're asking the question of the value of the social contributions of our farms, with us being farmers and volunteers, coaches, teachers, recreationists, artists, families, and also hosting our guest workers. We're asking the value of the economic contributions of our crops and our livestock, and the economic contributions of the support that sales and services receive for agriculture and through tourism, agritourism in particular. And the third is the environmental contributions, because our farms do provide biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and temperature moderation. We recommend and support investments in water for future generations. We advocate for change. So in conclusion, the Lake Country Farmers Institute strives to have farmers included in finding solutions for water management challenges in the District of Lake Country. We are rallying the farmers of Lake Country to join the Lake Country Farmers Institute to strengthen our voice. We are infiltrating advisory committees, water stewardship councils, and attending local government meetings to learn and share the farmer perspective. We are also at the grocery stores, ball diamonds, hockey and curling rinks, yoga studios, churches and temples, farmers markets, concerts, and school events. Farmers in Lake Country are committing to taking care of the land, water, and community. We advocate for change.
Thank you, Lynn. That is a lot to squeeze in there. So good job. So our next speaker is Ione Smith, who is a professional agrologist and is director and founder of Upland Agriculture Consulting. In this role, she has over 15 years of experience in developing recommendations and policies to improve agri-food sector viability and climate change resiliency. Uplands is a contractor with Farmland Advantage, a PES program through IAF that partners with farmers to engage watershed restoration projects across BC, including the Coxsilla River on southern Vancouver Island. Ione also has been serving as chair of the South Coast panel of BC's Agricultural Land Commission for the past 6 years, a position that gives her a unique perspective into the internal processes involved in developing and delivering agricultural legislation and policy-based decision-making. So welcome, Ione, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks for having me today. I'm zooming in from my home in Seashelt on the Shishla Nation territory here on the Sunshine Coast. I know I'm supposed to be talking just about Vancouver Island and the coast, but my work has taken me all over the province, and I've had the opportunity to work on the Lake Country Agricultural Plan where Lynn is based. And I've worked with the City of Delta looking at greenhouse water storage options for the greenhouse industry there. And I've just really enjoyed meeting farmers and meeting those involved in policy development from all over the province. So hopefully I can bring a bit of that perspective as well. Next slide, thank you. So with an eye to Vancouver Island and the coast, what I'm hearing a lot from producers is just how tired they are with dealing with either not enough water or too much water. What used to happen once every 10 to 15 years is now kind of more of a back-to-back thing. Whether it's an El Nino year or a La Nina year or what have you, there's either too much water or just not enough. And as the slides that John provided at the start of this panel discussion indicated, it looks like we're in for a bit of a dry spell, perhaps starting even earlier than usual, which would have implications, for example, for the City of Delta and the salt wedge there, which would have implications in the Okanagan, obviously, around drought and forest fires. So this is top of mind for a lot of producers. They would like to get ahead of these issues. They are feeling, I think, fairly beaten down by the competition for water from other user groups, such as urban residential development. I know that in my community here on the Sunshine Coast, there's been a pause that's been placed on subdivisions because we're not sure if there's going to be enough water for urban development in the near future. But that doesn't necessarily happen in many communities in the province, where a lot of urban development proposals are accepted, sometimes at the cost of agricultural water use in those same communities. So there's concern that if agricultural user groups don't have the data and don't have funding to have the studies behind them as to how much water they need and that they're using, they're often their licensing applications, for example, are often not prioritized ahead of other user groups. And I know, John, you mentioned the Coxsila watershed. I know in that area where we're working, there's also concern about the role of forestry, especially on Vancouver Island. A lot of the headwaters of our watersheds that serve agricultural users have been deforested over many years. And there's concerns that those are having longer term impacts now on the availability of water, but also on the flashiness of the river system itself, which is eroding watercourses and creating havoc on farm fields at lower elevations. I touched a little bit on the regulatory and permitting hurdles. There's a lot of producers who would like to do innovative things. There's a lot of funding out there for innovative projects, for water dugouts, for other storage options. But these come with sometimes or often insurmountable amounts of paperwork and administrative tasks to get through the licensing process, which is clearly backlogged now for many years. And frankly, just getting in the way of farmers being able to do oftentimes what's considered the right thing for water conservation and for getting ahead of the water and drought problem by storing water on their farm properties. There's also been a lack of communication from regulators from various levels of government, whether this is real or perceived. If we talk to different levels of government, they often, say that they're trying their hardest to communicate information out around regulations and permitting. But when you talk to farmers on the ground, they often don't feel that that's been happening adequately. So those are some of the key challenges that I'm seeing out there in the work that I'm doing. With regards to responsive actions, certainly payment for ecosystem services programs has a role to play. Historically, British Columbia hasn't been at the forefront of leadership in that regard, compared not only to other provinces, but to other places in the world. Partly, we're challenged by the growing value of farmland and how expensive it is compared to other parts of the country as well. But there's a great role for payment for ecosystem services programs to play. And we're seeing great take up around the province for programs like Farmland Advantage. I'm also interested in working with all levels of government to get a better understanding, not only of what the challenges that producers are facing, but providing bridging of the gap, so to speak, being that liaison, being able to communicate to various levels of government what those challenges are, and being an advocate for farmers, because I really feel that producers are so busy and have so much to do that they often don't have the time or the ability to organize and necessarily have that voice that Lynn was speaking to as well, and coming together collectively to advocate for some of these needs. And it'll be really interesting as we move forward to see how the watershed sustainability plan process rolls out. It's starting now in the Coxsila, and I think there's some great opportunities and reasons to be hopeful around partnering, certainly with First Nation communities and all other stewards and users of water within our communities. However, I think these are lengthy programs and lengthy processes, and a lot of the issues that producers are dealing with regards to water are urgent and require effective and immediate action starting yesterday. So those are my comments for now, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Ione. We're now going to move on to Andrew Bennett. Andrew is a professional agrologist who owns and operates Living Lands Agroecology and Moon Gravity Farm in Rossland, BC. And Kaylee Mulholland and their 3 young boys. He works with farms across Southeast BC through the Environmental Farm Plan Program and the Kootenay-Boundary Farm Advisors to improve water and soil management and regenerate agricultural landscape. A certified irrigation designer, He has run field days and produced fact sheets, case studies, webinars, and a series of short videos to help farmers irrigate more effectively and profitably. So thank you, Andrew, for being with us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, John. I'm very happy to be here. Am I coming through all good? Great. So good to hear the comments so far. I also have worked with farms in the Fraser Valley. My family is on the island, so I know what's going on there a little bit just from having seen it. Of course, I do focus a lot on Southeast BC, a bit of time. Good to see you here, Lynn. I know Lynn's beautiful farm out there in the Okanagan and the issues that they're facing in Lake Country. I would like to say overall that the issues are quite universal across the province. They're very similar, and there'll be plenty of time to talk about them. I would like to just give a bit of a background on what I do. The question I was specifically asked to answer is, what is the role of consulting to help deal with these issues? So a bit of background on me. I do have this small family farm. I spent a lot of time planting clear cuts as a tree planter. My academic background is as an environmental scientist and ecologist, and I've tried to unify these in what I call, well, what is called agroecology. And I really want to talk about the importance of both agricultural and ecological perspectives in the solution to these issues. The Environmental Farm Plan Program, I'd just like to explain a little, as well as the Kootenay-Boundary Farm Advisors. The Environmental Farm Plan Program is something I recommend to all farms. It is a crash course with one-on-one with an advisor on regulations and best practices. And even the best educated farmers I've encountered learn something new from the process, often about something they've been doing. They had no idea it was illegal, or a better way to do things. And it's also perhaps the reason most people do it. It's the foot in the door to get a lot of funding opportunities. And funding is going to be important. I'm going to touch on that later. Through the Kootenay-Boundary Farm Advisors, which I started with the project coordinator and my colleague Rachel Rusin back in 2017, is a very unique program, probably in Canada as well as just in BC, strictly focused on local extension, where we connect one-on-one with farmers to provide assistance. We put on field days, and critically, we make a lot of connections with experts. That could be academia, could be industry, could be other farmers. We do lots of connecting farmers to farmers. And that kind of community of farmers is something I would also like to touch on again later. Through this process, however, I found that there aren't a lot of water management specialists out there. So I trained in irrigation and became certified as an irrigation designer in 2019, and have been doing a lot of planning in irrigation management, water planning management. I also do grazing plans and riparian plans. All of these are very linked. And through that, it's a lot of education and a lot of working with people on their issues. So what are those issues? As I said, they're very similar across the interior. They break down sort of to farm scale issues. And this is often labor. Irrigation is very labor intensive. Farming is very labor intensive. Management, it's difficult, especially when you're doing lots of labor, to integrate new and innovative management processes. And a lot of that good management comes down to having the right tools, and infrastructure is often old or lacking. And to get the right tools takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of knowledge on how to use those tools properly. I do want to go to the big picture. I was really happy to see in Ione's slides the deforestation mention. I want to talk about the landscape sponge. Climate change gets a lot of the grief, and I don't want to diminish climate change, but I don't want to minimize the amount of damage that we have done as a province to our landscape. And I feel one of the roles of a consultant, especially an independent such as myself, is feeling free to talk very clearly about what the problem is here. And our problem is a lack of sponge in our landscape due to deforestation, soil loss, lack of wetlands, and damaged riparian areas, straightened creeks and rivers. This is what is also contributing to these fast and dirty freshets that are pushing through the Fraser and giving us a brown fan coming out there in Vancouver. All right, so that is our bank account. Our water bank account is flushing away. So I want to be very clear about that. The solution here, I mean, let's do what we can on farms. Farms do need to build storages as much as possible, and I'd be happy to talk about the economics of that. I have these economics discussions with farmers all the time. They don't want to give up productive land for a reservoir. I'm like, let's look at the dollars and cents here. Yeah, so there's farm scale solutions, but we also have to work as a province to reforest and restore our water, our wetlands, and our forests. Okay, so there's my little rant. Where was I going with all this? Yeah, okay, I want to talk about a little bit, if I have a moment, on customized plans. And this is the other thing I really like about working as an independent consultant one-on-one with farmers. Every farm is unique. And my spreadsheets and my mapping layers are always being updated to match the needs of a new unique situation I never imagined I would encounter. And I think it's really important that we have people who are connected to experts, connected to the science, who can also work individually with farmers on their issues. And I want to blow that up for my final comment on the importance of field days, the importance of having extension groups like the Kootenay-Boundary Farm Advisors, or reintegrated with the province, however it happens, to have field days that are going to bring people together. Farming can be a very lonely business, and you're stuck in your head a lot of the time. I know from my own farm. And it's really important to go places where you can share ideas, share experiences, commiserate about the problems, get inspired for the solutions. So yeah, it's multi-level. There's community level, there's landscape level, and then there's individual farms, and we need to work with them all together. That's it from me for now.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. And I'm sure that your ranting aspect probably connected with a few people when I saw the hearts and the clapping hands rising up on the side. And the emphasis on the fact that we're part of a big complex system, not just isolated individual units, I think is a really valuable point, as is, of course, the importance of networking, which is part of what we're trying to facilitate here as well, is that exchange. So I now encourage everyone who wants to see questions answered to put them into the question and answer and upvote those that you feel most connected with. I'm going to take advantage of my role here to ask one or two to begin while more questions are added. And I'll start with Ione, actually, a question for you. And this is, so given the drought and dry conditions of the past few years, what role do payments for ecosystem service programs like Farmland Advantage have in engaging farmers with water management issues? So what's the importance of recognizing and compensating farmers as land stewards in the context of watershed restoration in dry regions?
Sure, thanks for the question, John. So I guess I would start by saying payment for ecosystem services programs are a great way to honor farms who are interested in supporting projects like restoration of native grasslands or riparian areas. But I don't know if I would go so far as to use the word compensation, because it doesn't fully necessarily compensate them either for land that they're putting aside or the work involved. However, it does provide an overall stipend usually, or an honorarium for being involved. The project that IAF is currently operating, called Farmland Advantage, helps by covering mostly the costs involved. So there's an advisor who comes and will do ecosystem health assessment on the property and come up with a prescription or a set of actions that could be undertaken to improve the ecosystem, whether it's in the riparian area or the grasslands area. And then that's matched with restoration partners who will come and undertake the work, which is often removing native species, invasive species, planting native species, building fences to keep livestock out of waterways and so on, and those costs are covered. One of the challenges, though, that I mentioned earlier is the administrative piece. So anytime that work is going to be done sort of in and about a stream, of course, There's a Section 11 authorization process that needs to happen. And what we're seeing is some inconsistencies around the province in terms of how long it can take to get approvals for some of those projects. Particularly, especially what's frustrating is that a lot of these projects are really, the intent is to improve ecosystem health, not to deteriorate ecosystem health. And so that can be really challenging when there's a timeline around funding, such that funding needs to be spent on these projects during a specific fiscal year. And then the approval process can just delay things so long that then the project can't necessarily happen on the timeline that was anticipated. So those are some of the challenges. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of farmers who would like to do the right thing, who can't afford to do some of this work. So the payment for ecosystem services projects can go a long way in providing the capacity and the resources to get that work done. But if it isn't met by government at various levels coming to the table to get some of those applications prioritized and streamlined through, then essentially the projects just aren't going to happen. So those are some of the challenges that we've seen.
Yeah, I can relate because on our little piece of property here, we have some farmland advantage funding, and there's an excavator out my window right now who's helping to get some of the groundwork done for a riparian restoration project. And for the next 2 weeks, we're going to spend all of our free time planting native plants along the water course to try and make that deadline you just mentioned in terms of when the money needs to be spent. So yeah, you're certainly resonating with me. I have a question, Lynn. You went through some very long and very fast delivered list of all the things that the Farmers Institute is doing. Is there maybe an example of a success that you'd like to share of the work you've been doing in Lake Country?
Thanks, John. Great question. And honest to Pete, I didn't put John up to this, but I want to tell you about our recent workshop on Friday, February 23rd, where we had more than 75 people fill the Beasley Community Center, and the Water, Land and Resource Stewardship people came, and we had Ministry of Agriculture representation. Ted Vander Gulik, the irrigation guru for the province, was the draw, and we actually had provincial and federal funding through the Agricultural Sustainability Program to pay for Ted's presence. But then we also filled the room with our irrigation specialists and locals that like to, work with the farmers and have a really good handle on local conditions. Our registration was about 40, and then we had an extra 35 show up, so we had to put an extra pot of chili on for lunch. And the comments, I'm still working through the evaluation forms to supply to the funders with the event report. But by and large, people were very happy just to get together, and they loved the lunch and coffee break. Some very, thoughtful comments about the levels of communication we're receiving from the government agencies, and bless their hearts, we don't want to dump on the public servants. We know they're doing their job, but it's not answering the questions or providing the farmers the ability to have a back and forth to provide their input or perspective or feedback. We're also very happy that as a Farmers Institute, we're growing because the energy is around building the community and having people that can support each other and not have to always be chasing funding programs or looking to Investment Agriculture Foundation for solutions when we know we have the creative resources and the ability to find a lot of the answers within our own farms. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, you invited me to come to that, and unfortunately, I guess, I had to be in Vancouver to watch my daughter play rugby. So, okay, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have come up in the chat, and the one that's got the most upvotes is really kind of a broad question about our relationship to water. And so specifically, and I think I could get several of you to comment, so I'll leave it open as to who wants to start with this one. And the question or comment is, are you able to comment on a shift from attitudes about water as a resource to water as an outcome of a healthy climate or environment, and what that means for future actions? And Andrew, your mic is currently not muted, so I'll let you take the first stab at it.
Sure, but actually I'll pass it to Harvey. I saw his hand go up.
Okay,
I already ranted plenty on that.
okay. Harvey,
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. It's just like a thought that came in. I kind of want to be broad about the answer too. Well, firstly, I think, yeah, it's becoming more and more evident as we're entering these periods of drought that how important water is, how important it is that that we could try to use it as a precious resource. You know, being in Canada, we have so much of it, but it's still limited. I think we're finally seeing that. There have been places like South Africa and even in Chennai, India, that they've hit day zero. And I believe there's 3 new metropolitan cities looking to hit day zero this year, unfortunately, just with climate change implications. Here in the Metro Vancouver region, we haven't seen restrictions. Last year, I'd say it was kind of loose still, but this year I'm fairly confident that just the general public will understand how scarce this resource is. Now, just shifting gears a little bit, I'm also involved with implementing green infrastructure throughout the city. The idea is don't just pipe this stormwater away right back and just get rid of it that fast. Let's just use it in our cities, and we're doing that through rain gardens. We do curb cuts rather than just putting them into like those catch basins and then piping it away. And I can go on and on and on about the benefits of how just treating it like that will remove pollutants. It'll help rejuvenate the groundwater table, the base flow for creeks in summer. And that translates down to even our part of our farming area. When we have our watershed park area, sounds like a watershed, but like we have this large forested area where the runoff actually comes down to a ditch into the agricultural area in East Delta, and that's a source of irrigation as well. But now, if we're not replenishing that groundwater table, we will quickly run out of water as well in that area. So it's nice to see that there is support, at least from my projects as well, not just on the sense of irrigation and responsible use of water or the potable water management, but also understanding how we should be happier taking care of our rainfall rather than, again, just piping it away, offload the problem like really quickly. I think that was the initial kind of thought to urbanization, avoid these concrete jungles, even if we're creating them, then create sponge zones, create areas where we're not piping it away, let the water sit and absorb into the ground. And again, that's something that we might see in urbanized fire risks as well. But sorry, I'm going to continue ranting. This is something that this is kind of my forte. Hey, Andrew. So similar page, broader base.
okay, I see you unmuted, Andrew. Do you want to throw a bit in here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely, I really love everything that Harvey's saying there. And a lot of that is about the storage capacity of the landscape and recharging the landscape. And there's a lot of places that needs to happen, from the very top of the mountains right down to the bottom of the valleys. And I just want to sort of meld it into some of the other questions I see. I don't know how much time we have left, but I see people did want to talk about storages. So I figured this is related. When we think of water as a resource, we end up with storages that look like big muddy ponds with no vegetation around them. When we think of water as the lifeblood of the planet, that supports everything and is the basis for all life, then suddenly the value of the riparian restoration around our storages comes to mind. So I really want to build this picture of what we're trying to do is really rebuild ecosystems. Ecosystems are going to feed back into our landscape's ability to store water. There's really great, I love some of the allegorical tales of like Ascension Island, which, take it or leave it, it's covered in invasive species now, but those invasive species are green, and it went from a desert island to a completely green island thanks to colonialists, frankly. It's one of the oddly good things that happened out of colonialism, when the English planted a ton of plants, and it draws rain to that island, and the rainfall on that island has increased. It is now a lush green island where before it was desert. Take it or leave it how you want it on the invasiveness of that. But what I'm seeing in BC is really the need to regreen, and farms can do a lot of this. Now, when it comes to the economics of storage, this is also really important. If you don't have water, you can't grow anything. And that's extremely bad for a farm. I want to put this in terms of hay yields, just because it's a really nice number to work with. If you have dry land agriculture, you can get about half a ton of hay per acre in the year on a typical Kootenay or Okanagan pasture. If you irrigate properly and you reseed and you make sure that there's just the right levels of fertility, which isn't that expensive really per acre, you can multiply that by a factor of 10 and get 5 tons per acre. Now, that's more money, and it's also more carbon sequestration. It's more soil that's getting built, which is more sponge in your farm and more resilience to climate change. If you don't have water, you can't rebuild. So this is the value, and you can put it into dollars and cents. This is the value of giving up a portion of your land that you seem to be grazing animals on. But really, if you're grazing on dry land, it's going to be much more effective storing water. And that storage is going to be much more effective if it's a thriving ecosystem.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Just looking over the questions and trying to pay a little attention to time. We've got about 10 more minutes or so of discussion. And there seems to be a theme to a few of the questions that relates to more larger scale planning and management. And I know, Ione, you talked about the, I guess, first emerging water sustainability plan. And I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about what might be some things we can learn about that process and the scope for doing more water sustainability plans and other such initiatives that brings everybody together in a region to figure out how to manage the water.
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, I'll just start off by saying, as somebody who loves planning, and I don't want to put myself out of business, but there's a ton of plans out there already. So you can go to pretty much any region of the province and you've got watershed plans that have been done. You've got integrated stormwater management plans that have been done. You've got all sorts of things and all sorts of solutions that are shovel ready. I'm thinking about in Comox, there was the Solom River Agricultural Watershed Management Plan that was done in a couple different phases over the years. All the great work that the BC Climate Action Initiative did to come up with regional plans that had specific actions around how to manage and mitigate some of the climate impacts that were going to be coming and how that would impact agriculture with regards to drought and flooding. So part of me feels cautious about wanting to run around and do more planning when I actually think a lot of solutions are there. There's been a great level amount of engagement within the farming community. And every time we do planning, it takes up a lot of people's time from a volunteer perspective to get involved. And they often feel like they're being asked the same questions over and over and over again. So I would really recommend going back to the plans that we already have and looking at how to tweak some of the recommendations and update them to make sure that they're still relevant given today's numbers. But I would suggest that a lot of the solutions have been well documented and we don't need to start from scratch again. A water sustainability plan is a bit of a different beast because it necessarily involves bringing many different players to the table to look at an extremely longer term solution to a watershed and how to allocate water resources. And that's a really valuable practice, and it's a valuable, I think, outcome to have, but I don't think that it's going to solve the immediate drought and flooding problems that I think a lot of the good work has been done already and in terms of groundwork. So that's my planning rant, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, the questions were specific to the question of water sustainability plans. And yeah, they are long-term. And as I understand it, we really have not yet had anywhere in the province that has gone and embraced and moved forward with one as envisioned in the legislation. So
Yeah, and I think there's good reason for that because it requires partnership with Indigenous communities, which is really important. And that takes time, right? So it'll be interesting to see how the Coxsila River Watershed Sustainability Plan plays out. Being the first one, it's likely to, encounter challenges and kind of go through those shifts and stretches and growing pains. But it'll be really, I think, important for everyone, whether we live in that area or not, to watch how it unfolds.
right.
Could
Anyone
I
else like
actually
to-
ask Ione a question myself? Because just to follow up on earlier, one thing you mentioned was all the barriers, the regulatory barriers to doing innovative practice. And that seems to be often what stops a lot of these plans from being able to be followed through. There's licensing restrictions even on trying to build a wetland, let alone trying to improve on-farm water storage or other innovative actions. What sort of barriers how would you like to see the regulatory hurdles changed or improved?
Yeah, good question. So we did some work last year with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food on stewarding water courses, agricultural water courses, and we received a lot of great feedback on what some of those barriers are and potential solutions. I mean, part of the obvious problem is that the Ministry of Agriculture and Food is not involved in water licensing for agriculture. It used to be with the Ministry of Forests, now it's with Walrus. So I think, part of the issue is the siloed effect that government necessarily has in order to be experts in their areas. There needs to be a coming together of minds. If there is a policy direction and a real impetus and interest in streamlining some of these applications, it can be done. It has been done. So for example, for the new housing push to get housing development done, those applications also require water licensing for the most part. And yet those have been streamlined through the process because it's been seen as a priority for the province. So we know that it's possible to be done. It does take a bit of a collaborative, obviously like a collaborative effort to come together to do it, but it absolutely could be done if the political will was there. Somebody mentioned, not throwing our civil servants under the bus, and absolutely nobody wants to do that. I know a lot of great people working in government, but it is a frustratingly slow machine to have to change direction sometimes. And I think that when it does change direction, it has a huge amount of potential positive impact. So as long as we're kind of all steering that machine in the same direction, I think we'll get there. But the political will seems to be the cherry on top that just makes everything move faster. So coming together with a unified voice and having the same message for all levels of government, I think is really important. I don't know if that answered your question, Andrew, but.
It did. Thanks so much.
Okay, one of the other themes that is percolating through some of these comments is the idea of, or the importance of engagement of the farm community in these decisions that are so important to them. And Lynn has highlighted how she works with farmers in order to raise the voice at the level of the Lake Country Council. Harvy, as someone who's working in the local government, how does Delta engage with the farm community?
In my tenure here, we've had the privilege of actually working with the Delta Farmers Institute fairly directly. During last year's situation with the drought, actually, we bonded more, I'd say. Our senior management actually set up weekly meetings with the Delta Farmers Institute, and open to all farmers that, I recognize that not every single farmer in Delta may be affiliated with the DFI, as we call it. And we found it very, very valuable in a number of ways. I'd say the 2023 response to the drought and the preparedness and how we opened the dialogue to work together was quite quite the benefit for both sides. On one end, we're able to try to because I'm an engineer, so I was kind of look at it mathematically, right? So we're able to actually tell, okay, when is this peak flow going to be needed? Hey, so and so, when are you going to be irrigating what crop? When is your peak demand? What are we thinking? And we're running the numbers on our end, and that information in almost real time actually helped us prepare our response. Now going back the other way too, now the city's just like, oh, there's a few ditches where we'd like a little bit of access for. Is that okay if we use your farm road to access that choke point or something and improve it? There's a mutual benefit for both sides, and then even the farmers working with each other and understanding each other, and just having us in the room, or all of us in the room, having these discussions and planning. I totally understand that, you know, there's obviously like land rights, et cetera, but if we're going to respond to a drought and make sure the farmer's livelihood is best addressed from our perspective for conveying the irrigation water, sometimes we have to go on that farm road and put a temporary pump or what have you not, and just get it done, right? And that's what I found the most valuable. We have our regular check-ins every few months here and there, but I found that the 2023 weekly meetings and response between engineering, operations, and the DFI, the communication was key, and I'm hoping to maintain that going forward. But I'm also hoping for a better growing season where we're not all like too worried or stressed out about how much rainfall there is. But climate change reality is here.
Thank you, Harvey.
Could I quickly add to that? Just because I had the benefit of working with the City of Delta on a couple of projects, and I just want to give kudos to Harvey and his team, because one of the things that I've found really great about Delta is the level of communication. And it kind of goes back to one of my original comments about this lack of communication in general, whether it's real or perceived. The City of Delta has communication dialed with the agricultural community. There's an active agricultural, I think it's called the Agricultural and Hunting Advisory Committee now. And it's not just one staff member from the city that goes to those meetings. Harvey's often at those meetings. Different departments are there to talk about what's going on and provide updates. And I really, really, really encourage communities without these agricultural advisory committees to form one, if possible, to sit on them, to populate them with the farming community. It's not an onerous task to do, and it really goes a huge distance for keeping that communication open so that there's a better understanding about what the priorities are from the farming community, but also so that the city or local government can better communicate out what sort of projects and initiatives are happening or development proposals that might impact the agricultural community as well.
I would love to add to that and throw some kudos out to the Okanagan, to Bob Rasco at the Black Mountain Irrigation District, who I recently had a chat with and took a tour of their facilities, and truly amazing there on Mission Creek. And what I really liked was not just the communication and the farmer involvement in their decision making, but also the data, which was also something Harvey's mentioning, really good data on their reservoirs, on their snowpack, on how those are going to be able to be projected through the season, so that they're not just slapping restrictions on people willy-nilly, which does happen in a number of other districts in the Okanagan. You can talk to Lynn about that. So there's a lack of data in a lot of these areas, and then there's these really great shining examples with good data and good communication.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're going to wrap it up now. Any last comment? Lynn, you didn't have a chance to say anything about this topic, although you kind of talked about it a lot to begin with.
John, I'd just like to encourage everybody to, you know, put on your big girl or big boy underpants and be brave. You know, be courageous, put your shoulders back, and get the message out that we're open to change, but we want to be included in the change conversation. I think it's up to us as farmers to stand together and to make that heard loud and clear.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everybody.